If you were a woman in the ancient world, there was no better place to live than Egypt. From the ranks of the royals to the common citizens, women in ancient Egypt enjoyed more rights and powers than women living in Europe as late as the 20th century. They could own property, divorce their husbands, live on their own, and some even ruled as pharaohs. Women and the power they held may be the key to why Egypt becomes the world's first great civilization, predating even Greece and Rome. Dr. Zahi Hawass is one of Egypt's foremost archaeologists and author of Silent Images: Women in Pharaonic Egypt.
From the pre-dynastic period, the ancient Egyptian made balance between man and women. They described exactly the man's role in the society and women's role in the society. And therefore that balance made the stability in the nation. It gave justice. They called it ma'at in ancient Egypt. And that ma'at, that justice between women and men, made the society and gave us this wonderful civilization that we talk about it all the time.
The greatness of ancient Egyptian civilization is built on this cosmic balance, or ma'at. It is at the heart of Egypt's mythical creation. The story is carved on the walls of the 3,000-year-old temple of Karnak. In the beginning, the world is a void. From the darkness emerges the golden sun god, Amun, and with him, his divine consort, Mut. Using her seductive powers, Mut arouses Amun. As the ancient texts say, she kindles his flame, and in his exquisite joy, the universe is created. But this universe is fragile and could suddenly fall back into chaos if Amun is not ritually stimulated to reenact creation. And so every day on Earth, a select cult of royal women enter the gates of the Karnak temple and in grand procession make their way through the sacred precincts to the holiest place in all of Egypt, the private sanctuary of Amun. Here, in total secrecy, these royal women reenact the creation story with the earthly manifestation of Amun. These women are called the gods' wives of Amun. Unlike hereditary positions, such as queen or princess, any woman of royalty could achieve the title of God's wife. They ruled from the ancient city of Thebes. Although today the city is in ruins, to the trained eye of Egyptologists like Emily Teeter, Thebes is the stage on which the most influential men and women vied for power. For at the height of Egyptian civilization, Thebes was the biggest, richest, and most sacred city in the ancient world.
But Thebes was most important as the center of the god Amun, who is thought to dwell here at the Temple of Karnak. For over 2,000 years, the political and economic power of Egypt stemmed here from the Karnak Temple under the authority of the god Amun.
From 2100 to 500 BCE, Amun's city of Thebes was the heart and soul of ancient Egypt. On the west bank of the Nile River is the Theban necropolis, the city of the dead. Discovered here in the Valley of Kings is the most celebrated archaeological find in history, the tomb of King Tut. On the east bank of the Nile is a series of temples, all dedicated to the worship of Amun. The Temple of Luxor, with its colossal statues to honor the god. Down a processional lined with sphinxes lies Karnak, home to Amun. Protecting Karnak are 9 entry gates, or pylons, one of which is the largest temple entrance in the world. The Karnak Temple is a city unto itself, nearly twice the area of Vatican City. Karnak contains the tallest obelisk in Egypt, and its hypostyle hall is the largest column building on Earth. All the riches and splendor of Thebes were amassed in the name of Amun. Those closest to the god controlled his great wealth and wielded his power. Pharaohs were close to Amun, but there was a cult of women even closer. Here, in an area of Karnak often overlooked, Emily Teeter is uncovering evidence of an even more intimate relationship. The gods' wives of Amun.
The close relationship between the god's wife and the god Amun is very vividly demonstrated by a series of freestanding chapels that the women built here within the sacred precinct of the god Amun. Not only are they in an extraordinary position within the holy sanctuaries, but the scenes on these chapels show the god's wife and the god in really intimate poses, which are extraordinary in Egyptian art.
Here, the god's wife intimately embraces Amun. The god presses himself against her, even placing his foot between her legs. Not only are the god's wives sexually intimate with Amun, at a second chapel, Teeter finds evidence that the gods' wives are related to Amun through divine birth. Here, Amun gives life to the god's wife by touching her nose with an ankh, the Egyptian symbol for life. At the same time, he hands her 3 ankhs, entrusting her with his divine power over life. But beyond religious power, the gods' wives had tremendous political power. A testament to their earthly authority stands on the west bank of the Nile, just across from Karnak. Here is one of the most glorious temples in all of Egypt, built by a woman who used her relationship with Amun to achieve the ultimate goal, to rule all of Egypt. Beneath the sculpted stone faces of her colossal statues lies the real story of a god's wife who becomes Pharaoh. Her name is Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut's ascent from god's wife to king is fraught with politics and revenge. Hatshepsut inherits the title of god's wife from her grandmother, the first known god's wife in history. And she learns to wield power as daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose I and his principal wife. But when Hatshepsut is 14 years old, her father dies. Thutmose II, the son of Thutmose I, with a lesser wife, takes the throne. Thutmose II is not of pure royal blood, so he marries Hatshepsut, his half-sister, to legitimate his reign. He dies after ruling for 12 unexceptional years. Then his son from another wife is next in line to inherit the throne. Too young to rule alone, Thutmose III needs a co-regent. Hatshepsut, his stepmother, seizes the chance. Family connections create the opportunity for Hatshepsut to be co-ruler. But according to Dr. Gay Robbins, it's her position as God's wife that seals the deal.
God's wife was Hatshepsut's favorite title. The office of God's wife carried with it tremendous ritual and economic importance. The God's wife had to interact directly with the deity in the temple in a way which otherwise only the king would do. And so it's likely that she was able to use this position as a springboard to her ultimate assumption of the kingship.
Hatshepsut went so far to project the image of a good pharaoh to her people that she even wore the pharaonic beard and dressed like a man. And she fulfilled the destiny of pharaohs by building. While the early pharaohs constructed pyramids for their burial chambers, Hatshepsut is one of the first pharaohs to build her funerary temple in Thebes and the Valley of Kings. Hatshepsut's Deir el-Bahari would have been reached by an avenue lined with sphinxes, sacred fountains, and myrrh trees. Among ancient Egyptians, the temple was simply known as Djeser Djeseru, splendor of splendors. Today, the Egyptian and Polish archaeological mission is restoring the temple using many of the techniques the ancient Egyptians would have used to construct it. But to Polish Egyptologist Miroslav Barwik, the restoration reveals a startling twist in the biography of Hatshepsut.
The Deir el-Bahari temple is essentially a political and religious biography of Hatshepsut's life. It depicts her birth into the pharaonic dynasty, her co-regency with Thutmose III, and then her kingship. But what's interesting is that after her death, late into Thutmose III's reign, her official history was rewritten. Her representations were attacked, and officially, she doesn't exist as a king anymore.
Mysteriously, after Hatshepsut dies, Deir el-Bahari and her other monuments throughout Karnak are attacked. Her images, and even her royal name, are chiseled away. Some Egyptologists explain this defacement as an attempt by Thutmose III to exact revenge on the evil stepmother who purportedly stole his throne. But the discovery of a new Hatshepsut monument, with her name and image intact, is revealing a far different story.
Calgary, Montreal, Halifax, Chicago, Dallas, Oslo, Auckland, Osaka. Whether it's around your city or around the globe, AT&T Canada can help keep you connected. That's because our high-speed network can give you fast, reliable connections virtually anywhere you do business. Small world, eh?
On Disney DVD and video.
This journal is the key to finding Atlantis.
The journey begins.
Take us back, boy!
The mystery unfolds.
This is for real.
And the legend comes to life.
Welcome to the city of Atlantis.
Oh boy.
I'm knocking on Bucket Day's door. Oh,
Canadians coast to coast are knocking on Buck-A-Day's door. They want Canada's fastest delivery. No clones, only quality IBM PCs. 1 year free internet access, a free CD writer, and our 30-day money-back guarantee. All for only $9.99 or just a buck a day. A 950 megahertz Intel processor, 128 meg SD RAM, 20 gig drive, 4 USB ports, CD writer, 56K modem, high-speed network card, Windows XP, and 1 year free internet access with Primus Canada. The Buck-A-Day Company approves almost everybody who calls today. Your IBM comes with a 1 year warranty and the Buck-A-Day Company's 30-day money-back guarantee. Get a fully loaded IBM PC with free CD writer for just a buck a day. Start knocking now.
Come on, let me sing it.
Bigger. Bolder. The reinvented Camry. The best-selling car in North America just got better. Beautiful.
Today, a team of French and Egyptian archaeologists is restoring a small temple they call the Red Chapel. It is a monument that was disassembled before Thutmose III had a chance to deface and destroy it.
Over a period of almost 100 years, 350 blocks were discovered in the foundations of the third pylon of Karnak. And these 350 blocks have been reconstructed during the past 3 years. And the reconstruction of the Red Chapel of Hatshepsut is nearly finished.
In reassembling the Red Chapel, Larche and his team have discovered that the monument was started by Hatshepsut, but completed by her stepson. Many of the images commissioned by Hatshepsut celebrate her co-regency with Thutmose III. Her cartouche appears next to his, and they even stand side by side as they conduct religious rituals. Just after Hatshepsut's death, Thutmose III adds 2 rows to the top of the chapel, depicting his own coronation. Below, he leaves the images of Hatshepsut's coronation intact. If Thutmose III was waiting for Hatshepsut's death to exact revenge on his evil stepmother, then why does he complete the Red Chapel and leave her images and royal name untouched? Clearly, he attacks her name and images later in life. So what happens to change his heart? Near the end of his reign, Thutmose III fathers an heir to the throne named Amenhotep II. As Thutmose III approaches the last part of his life, Amenhotep II is still too young to rule alone. It appears he will need a co-regent. With the memory of Hatshepsut's glorious reign still fresh in the minds of Egyptians, Thutmose III fears that another woman might usurp the throne from his son. To ensure Amenhotep II's ascension, Thutmose III tries to eliminate Hatshepsut's accomplishments by erasing her from history.
Thutmose probably didn't want his successor to be encumbered by royal women in the same way as he'd been overshadowed by Hatshepsut. And therefore, he deliberately destroyed Hatshepsut's memory to prevent her becoming a role model for some of the current royal women.
As further assurance against a woman taking the throne, Thutmose III attacks the power base from which Hatshepsut launched her ascent to Pharaoh, the position of God's wife. By the time Amenhotep II becomes king, the title of God's wife is largely ceremonial and could not be used by women to achieve political power. at least for now. December 6th, 1912. Amarna, Egypt. While excavating the remains of an ancient sculptor's studio, workers unearth a spectacular find. It's the painted bust of Nefertiti. The image of Queen Nefertiti quickly becomes an icon of female beauty. But Nefertiti is more than just a pretty face. With her husband, the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten, she leads a religious revolution that replaces Amun and his pantheon of gods with just one god, the sun disk Aten. Nefertiti rides the wave of this religious revolution to elevate herself to the status of a god. She does it by resurrecting the power of the gods' wives. Today, in the temples of Karnak and Luxor, Egyptologists are finding evidence of Nefertiti's strategy on stones from destroyed temples. During Nefertiti and Akhenaten's 13-year reign, they built temples to Aten within the sacred precinct of Amun. This was the ultimate act of sacrilege against the old religion. So after their reign, all their temples were destroyed, and the building blocks were used as filler in the foundations of monuments built by the next rulers.
At the beginning of the Ramesside dynasty, Horemheb has dismantled all the construction of Akhenaten, and he has reused these smaller blocks in the foundations of 3 pylons. So far, 60,000 blocks were discovered, and we think that many more are still buried in different foundations.
By the eastern gate of Karnak, Egyptologists are combining old-fashioned field archaeology with computer imaging. They have determined that here, during the reign of Nefertiti and Akhenaten, once stood a giant entry into the temple of Karnak. So far, they have puzzled together nearly 100 scenes of ritual offering. To their surprise, the majority of the scenes show Nefertiti leading the sacred rituals. Traditionally, making offerings to the gods of incense, oils, wine, fruits, and grains can only be conducted by the pharaoh or god's wife. So this new evidence suggests that Nefertiti had at least as much power as Pharaoh. And although there is no position of God's wife in this new religion, Nefertiti conducts rituals for the god Aten that are similar to the rituals performed by the gods' wives for Amun. Nefertiti harnesses the religious tradition of the gods' wives to elevate herself from earthly queen to goddess. For over a decade, she is the most influential woman in the ancient world. Then, she vanishes. Some Egyptologists speculate that her religious enemies destroy her tomb, and her mummy is desecrated. Others suggest that her mummy is secreted away by supporters and buried in a place yet to be discovered. But today, Nefertiti survives as one of the world's most recognized women. And in her own time, she reestablishes the power of women. 60 years later, in 1290 BCE, a new woman will use the position of God's wife to gain authority. But this woman adds the element of seduction.
Enter the Discover Atlantic.
Nefertari. The very sound of her name evokes beauty, splendor, and sensuality. She is the most desirable woman in the ancient world. Nefertari's story is one of sex, power, and intrigue. When she is barely a teenager, she catches the eye of a young co-regent named Ramses II, who will soon rule Egypt as Pharaoh Ramses the Great. Ramses will have all the power one man could want, but he lacks one thing: divine lineage. His forefathers were soldiers who became pharaohs using military might. Ramses wants to be a god, and the key to his desire is the god's wife. If Ramses can marry a god's wife of Amun, that would make him the earthly embodiment of Amun, thus becoming a god himself. But first, he has to resurrect the position of God's wife. In Luxor, he honors them by incorporating his temple into a monument built by the greatest god's wife, Hatshepsut. And in the Theban necropolis, he restores Deir el-Bahari, Hatshepsut's funerary temple. By exalting the god's wives and marrying a god's wife, Ramses elevates his own status and the position of God's wife. It is a position that Nefertari desires. But to become God's wife, Nefertari must stand out from Ramses' 20 other wives and 1,000 concubines. What is the secret of her seduction?
Ancient Egyptian women were very fond of their makeup, just as women are today. Now, Nefertari, like other royal women as well as noble women, clearly used cosmetics to enhance her own natural beauty. And as well as cosmetics, she would have used wigs and clothes that would have helped make her look much more attractive to her husband, especially since he had so many other alternative wives.
Dr.Salima Ikram is an expert in the art and science of ancient Egyptian cosmetology. Many of the ingredients from an ancient Egyptian woman's cosmetics box are still available today in the Cairo spice market. Henna from the Delta region of Egypt is used to dye hair and to color feet. And galena, or kohol, a mineral found in the eastern desert, is ground up and applied as a line to the inner eye.
Kohl was applied with a stick. And you can see that you get different cosmetic lines from pulling out.
During the time of Nefertari, the eye line extended far back to the ear. The Egyptians associated eyeliner with ritual purity. Priestesses wore it and even used it to anoint statues of the gods. Malachite, crushed to a powder and mixed with goose or ox fat into a creamy paste, is spread upon the eyelid. Next is rouge, for which there's not much evidence in antiquity, except in the tomb of Nefertari. Another important item of seduction from Nefertari's cosmetics box is lipstick. Lipstick is made from the same ground-up ochre substance as rouge, mixed with lettuce seed oil. As a finishing touch, Nefertari would use perfume. Today, as in antiquity, Egypt produces some of the most aromatic aphrodisiacs in the world. Perhaps the most tantalizing article in a royal woman's arsenal is clothing. The paintings of Nefertari depict her in a translucent linen dress. The painting is so good and the linen is so fine that one can see right through to her skin.
Royal women would have had some of the finest clothes available to anyone in ancient Egypt, and Nefertari would have had especially fine linen that is wrapped close to her body, and it's very transparent, and you can see sort of layers and layers and then tantalizingly bits of flesh through the linen. And this would have been, of course, very erotic and evocative, and certainly would have made her very alluring and irresistible to Ramses II.
With her erotic fashion sense, enticing perfume, and ravishing beauty, Nefertari is chosen by Ramses to be God's wife. She takes her power to newfound heights. During the 33rd year of their marriage, Ramses honors her in one of the world's most imposing temple complexes, Abu Simbel. Carved in the cliffs near Egypt's southern border with Sudan, the first temple facade contains 4 gigantic statues of a seated Ramses the Great. On the second temple are 6 colossal standing statues. Soaring nearly 30 feet high, they are among the largest in all of Egypt. In an act extremely rare in ancient Egypt, Ramses depicts Nefertari equal to him in stature. As God's wife and Pharaoh's wife, diplomat and lover, Nefertari stood equal to Pharaoh Ramses for 25 years of his reign. Then, at the age of 46, Nefertari falls ill and dies. Ramses would rule for another 42 years, but he would never forget his lifelong love. To mourn her passing, Ramses constructs Nefertari's House of Eternity, a lavish tomb in the Valley of Queens. The temple walls are ablaze with colorful hieroglyphs, earning the temple its modern nickname, Egypt's Sistine Chapel. It is considered the greatest tomb ever found in ancient Egypt. With it, Nefertari achieves the ultimate honor, immortality. But the glory that Nefertari and Ramses II bring to Egypt does not last. 100 years later, by the time of Ramses VI, Egypt is crippled by weak rulers and civil unrest. Warriors from Nubia invade, and for the first time in its history, roles are reversed, and Egypt is conquered by its southern colony. It is 1150 BCE, and a familiar power is about to re-emerge. The gods' wives of Amun, but this time they are black women from Nubia. Before the new black pharaohs can continue their conquest of northern Egypt, they must secure the southern city of Thebes. To do it, the Nubian kings cunningly resurrect the position of God's wife. They bestow the title upon their daughters with the hope of expanding their own power. But over time, the daughters transform their religious power into political power and usurp the rule of the pharaohs. At the Medinet Habu burial complex in Thebes, Egyptologists are now revealing the extent of power wielded by the gods' wives.
The most important of the gods' wives are buried here at Medinet Habu. These were very, very powerful women who represented both political and religious power. They ruled Egypt as kings. These women were from Nubia, from what is today Sudan. And under their rule, they reunified Egypt and ushered in a period of renaissance in arts and culture and politics that lasted for over 500 years.
The location of the gods' wife chapels begins to indicate the power of these Nubian women. Across from an early monument constructed by Pharaoh Hatshepsut, and along the procession route to a temple built by Pharaoh Ramses III, the god's wife, Amenirtis, built her funerary chapel. But the true indicator of her power is in the chapel courtyard, where she is depicted in the ancient tradition of gods and kings.
The fact that the gods' wives really ruled as kings is very evident in these scenes from their tomb chapel at Medinet Habu. Here we have Shepenwepet, one of the gods' wives, before the gods Re-Herakti and Isis. And here it's very clear that she is the same height as these gods. And this is extraordinary because people who are not kings or queens will be shown shorter than the gods. Another symbol of the rulership of these women is here. Here is a representation of Amenirtis, another of the gods' wives. And on her forehead, she wears the snake. It's called the uraeus. And this is a symbol of royalty. Another indication is that her name, Amenirtis, is here encircled in a cartouche, in an oval. And this is, again, a prerogative of kings and queens.
The gods' wives are frequently depicted wearing the double feather crown, a royal headdress that symbolized authority over the two kingdoms of Egypt. Inside Amenirtis' temple, Teeter discovers further evidence of the gods' wives' kingly power. Here, Amenirtis presents offerings directly to Amun. It's an honor reserved for only a king. From 1150 to 525 BCE, the gods' wives were among the most powerful rulers on earth. But unlike gods' wives of the past, gods' wives from this period may have been celibate. Egyptologists point to the fact that the reigning god's wife passes on her title to an adopted daughter. Descriptions of the adoption ceremony survive. The god's wives and her attendants go to the temple of Amun with offerings. There, her attendants tie amulets and adornments on her. She is anointed with oils. The two-feathered crown of Egypt is placed on her head, and she is proclaimed God's wife, hand of God. With this ritual, the adopted daughter completes her transformation to God's wife. But were the gods' wives celibate? The discovery of Metkare's mummy may shatter that belief.
On Disney DVD and video.
Here in the Mummy Lab at the Cairo Museum, doctors Ikram and Iksander examine Metkare, the alleged pregnant god's wife.
This is the mummy of Metkare. It's from the dynasty 21st.
She's been mummified in the typical 21st dynasty way with having all the organs returned to her body. But what's interesting is that she looks as if she was pregnant, and that would have been a great scandal for someone who was supposed to be a celibate god's wife of Amun.
In addition to looking large around the abdomen, buried at her feet was what appears to be the small mummy of a baby. Are the gods' wives truly celibate? Or did Nefertari violate the code of celibacy and die in childbirth? Doctors Ixander and Ikram decide to investigate further.
So here's the x-ray that you took of the baby.
Yeah. Look what we have here. It's a baboon.
It is
not
her...
a baby, not a human.
It's her pet baboon, and it's beautifully mummified. Look, it's...
The baby mummy turned out to be a mummified baboon, probably a favorite pet of the young god's wife. And Nefertari's pregnancy turned out to be the work of an embalmer who had overstuffed her. Unfortunately, the Nefertari mummy episode will not resolve the issue over the celibacy of the gods' wives. One thing is certain. Under the rule of the gods' wives, Egypt reaches new heights and Thebes becomes one of the greatest cities in the world. But by the middle of the 6th century BCE, while Thebes thrives under female rule, weak male pharaohs in the north are threatened by outside invaders. This time it is the Assyrians. The Assyrians overrun northern Egypt and eventually make their way south and surround the gates of Thebes.
After several unsuccessful attempts, the Assyrians finally entered Thebes. According to the historical records of the Assyrians, it was a tremendous sack of the city. They burned the huge wooden doors that stood in the temple entryways. They took away the gold statues that stood in the sanctuaries. And according to the Assyrian king, he made the Egyptians feel his weapons bitterly. The sack and devastation of Thebes was the end of the greatest city in the ancient world.
Thebes is reduced to a sand-swept ghost town. For nearly the next 500 years, the intruders ignore the privileged status of Egyptian women, and the power and legend of the gods' wives plunges into obscurity. Then, in 50 BCE, an 18-year-old girl inherits the throne and reasserts the power of Egyptian women. Her name is Cleopatra. Cleopatra is remembered more as a myth than a real woman. Generations have portrayed only one part of her story, that of a woman with an insatiable appetite for love and power. But a new dimension of her portrait is becoming clear. She was a capable ruler and brilliant stateswoman. Cleopatra resurrects the power of women, employing all the weapons of her predecessors: politics, religion, and seduction, to achieve supreme power over Egypt and almost the world.
Enter the Discover Atlantis, the Lost Empire sweepstakes now. Call the toll-free number on your screen or log on to Discovery Channel's website, exn.ca, right now and complete the entry form.
Though revered as a god by her people, in 52 BCE, when the Roman war machine threatens to invade, Cleopatra uses the earthly power of seduction to save Egypt. She bears the son of the great Julius Caesar. And if it were not for his assassination by the Roman Senate, she would have ruled the world by his side. When the Romans send their general Mark Antony to subdue her, Cleopatra captures his heart with her amorous charms and visions of world conquest. Through this romantic and political alliance, she restores Egypt to its former glory. But in 30 BCE, the Romans invade Egypt and defeat Antony and Cleopatra. Unwilling to submit to imperial rule, she commits suicide. According to the Greco-Roman historian Plutarch, she dies from the bite of an asp. But many modern scholars believe that Cleopatra experimented with poisons and would have known that the venom of a cobra the very serpent that adorns the crest of the pharaoh's crown, was more deadly and a less painful way to die. With the death of Cleopatra, a 3,700-year epic of Egyptian history comes to an end. The pharaohs are dethroned. The temples of old lay in eerie silence, and women are denied their power. It will take the world nearly 2,000 years before women gain the kinds of rights that all women had in ancient Egypt.
If we look today at the position of women in ancient Egypt, we'll find they had more rights than any woman in any place. I think today, women today in every country should take this as a model for making a better future.
Today, as women of all nations struggle to balance male and female power, perhaps they can look for inspiration from the women who ruled ancient Egypt.
Tomorrow, dive through the depths to what was there all along. Tune in for your chance to win on Hidden Worlds Week.